It's an amazing incident. The Cathars came out into the bright light of day about 20 years later when a debate was organized south of Albi. And there were several bishops from England, from France, from Languedoc, with these unidentified holy men who were very cagey and basically swore their allegiance to the New Testament and didn't say anything unorthodox. But it was only when they were asked about the role of the church that they dropped the veil entirely and just said the church was staffed with ravening wolves and hypocrites and seducers, that they were worshiping the wrong God, saying this in front of the most powerful people in the land. But they were not burnt because probably the people organizing the debate, the local lord of Lombez, was probably a Cathar sympathizer, and probably the entire crowd was sympathetic. A few years later, in a town called St. Felix, there was a heretical conclave in the wide open. There were Cathar bishops from France, from Italy. There was even a Bogomil from Constantinople who met for several days in 1167 to talk about dogma, to talk about the organization of Cathar parishes. This is a counter-church.
Why does it succeed in implanting itself and having a long history in some places, alarming church authority, alarming the papacy, and not in others?
Professor Malcolm Lambert.
And I think one vital clue is, was there effective persecution stamping on the beginnings of the heresy, rounding up the effective enthusiasts who spread these beliefs? I think our evidence is that Catharism did have a hold in northern France, but it is there effectively persecuted. Classic case is England, where a party of Cathars turn up, are rounded up, are brought before King Henry II at the Council of Oxford in 1166, are interrogated, condemned, branded and turned adrift. That was the effective end of Catharism. England was, by medieval standards, a tightly governed country, and the king with the bishops acted effectively and immediately, and of course it had the cover of the Channel. If we turn to the areas where the heresy made its greatest impact, i.e. southern France and Italy, we see in both cases an absence of effective persecution early on.
Before the Crusade, the Cathars of Languedoc are not effectively persecuted because no one wants to, often not even the local Catholic priests. The Languedoc nobility is proud of its independence and cultural distinctiveness. Catharism never becomes the majority faith, though, nowhere near it, but it had a lot of sympathizers. Many noble women become perfects and inspire the population. On the other hand, the Catholic Church is in such disrepute that it's often robbed by marauding knights. Anti-clerical feelings run high. And the Cathars seem a handy alternative. Malcolm Lambert.
The Cathars, as preachers, are extraordinarily poor. They require very little. They're very attractive to have as cheap chaplains as opposed to the ordinary clergy. The clergy of the South, by and large, the rank-and-file parish clergy, are demoralised. In that situation, Catharism has a pretty free hand, and we, I think, only see a change in circumstances with the coming of Innocent III in 1198. And he is, I think, the first figure to sketch out a solution.
Pope Innocent III's solution is dramatic and unprecedented. The launching of a crusade within Christendom, propelled by propaganda and fueled by the promise of rewards in heaven and on earth.
To some historians, the Cathars were a beacon of light in the darkness of the Middle Ages. To others, a serious threat to the very nature of Western civilization. And a few even suggest they were merely a handy excuse for a land grab. What's certain is the campaign against them started with a bloody crusade and ended with the dogged determination of the Holy Inquisition to burn every last Cathar perfect, or clergy. Edmonton writer, broadcaster, and filmmaker Bob Chelmick journeyed to the south of France, where the story of the Cathars is still a potent mix of myth, politics, religion, and tourism, 800 years after their demise. He met there with Stephen O'Shea, the Canadian author of The Perfect Heresy, The Revolutionary Life and Death of the Medieval Cathars.
So we're sitting near an autoroute and overlooking...
You can see in the middle distance, it's just like a visitor from another time. It's Carcassonne. It's this crenellated city with these fortifications, an 11th century castle, a 12th century church. You can see the Tower of the Inquisition, where they used to keep the prisoners. To the right, there's a small hill. That's where the Crusaders encamped in that famous summer of 1209. So Carcassonne was the capital of the Trinqueval County. This hillock in the Aude Valley has been fortified since the time of the Romans. And at the time of the Crusade, there were probably 40 to 50,000 people cowering within the walls of Carcassonne. The Crusaders first attacked the northern suburb, captured the wells, and then they attacked the southern suburb. There was furious fighting, and Simon de Montfort first distinguished himself for bravery there. It's when they realized that the southern suburb was too well fortified, so they engaged sappers to mine under the walls, to dig under the walls. How did they get to the walls under this rain of crossbow fire? It's kind of interesting. They built what's called a cat, or a bailey, which is basically a big tower on wheels covered with animal skins of freshly slaughtered animals, so that this tower was completely surrounded by dripping blood and gore. So the defenders on the wall would be trying to set the tower alight, this mobile tower, with flaming crossbow fire. It would land in the blood and fizzle out. The attackers would slowly roll it over the moat, Monty Python style basically. Scores of people huddled under this tower, and they would bring it directly to the walls. And the minute they got to the walls, they would start to dig furiously under the walls where no one could reach them.
Because the mobile tower eventually did catch fire.
It eventually did catch fire, yes. Once it was flaming when it reached the walls, so they had to dig even more furiously than they normally had to do. This tower was on fire in front of them. It collapsed, but they had already dug deep enough under the walls so that they couldn't be caught by archer fire. Then they spent several hours digging far underneath the walls, so that they were basically mining the wall from underneath. They would stuff this new mine with straw, with tar, anything flammable. Then they'd set it alight in the middle of the night. All the supports would catch fire. The wall would be standing on nothing and would collapse. The minute it collapsed, the wall was breached. The Crusades stormed the suburb, Castellar. They got through, and then they sort of prematurely celebrated their victory after slaughtering all the defenders. They left just a skeleton force there of several hundred people. The fellows within Carcassonne proper came rushing out of the gates of Carcassonne and slaughtered all the Crusaders who were there. Then the siege began in earnest.
A month later, the Crusaders would take Carcassonne by cunning and by flouting the rules of war. Count Raymond Roger Trinqueval was promised safe passage out of his city to negotiate. He was clapped in irons. Carcassonne, disheartened, surrenders.
They decided not to kill the Carcassonnais because the Crusaders were mad at themselves because they had burnt Béziers down. All the loot of Béziers had gone up in smoke. They didn't want to do the same with Carcassonne, so they allowed everyone to leave the town unharmed, wearing only the shirt on their back. One at a time, they had to leave through a small gate. Anyone who was hiding any jewelry was ripped off them. They were body searched, and they were just left go out into the wilds.
The outcome of the siege of Carcassonne is a bit of a puzzle to historians, given what was soon to become the routine, burning heretics alive. No attempt was made to sort the Cathars from the Catholics of Carcassonne. They all went free. Some say this points to the real purpose of the Albigensian Crusade, that it wasn't ultimately about heresy. It was about land, wealth, and feudal ideology.
I think the impetus actually comes much more from secular authority than it does from the church.
Professor R.I. Moore of the University of Newcastle upon Tyne looks at the origins of the Albigensian Crusade differently than many historians, and it's a contentious issue. Moore says it may have been more a matter of hearsay than heresy, that the Cathars were mere